he asked Iggy Pop. All of the youngsters know exactly who that is, right? Uh, some of you are like, I know who he is. But a couple of things. There's so much in that. Anthony Bourdain's question, which we're going to get to because C.S. Lewis uses the same language. He says, what thrills you? Really important word, thrill. What thrills you? To Iggy Pop, who, if you don't know, was one of those generational singers who, for the way he did it, changed rock and roll in a sense, who early on in life, he had and experienced everything. And for those of you who are adults, that's all I need to say. I mean everything. And here is another example. How many of these examples do we need where people who have had everything literally the world has to offer, who come to the end of it all and basically say, it doesn't do it for me. The money doesn't do it for me. The fame doesn't do it for me. The other stuff that goes along with it doesn't do it for me. How did he end? What thrills you, Bourdain asks? Sharing time with the people I love. Now, the flip side of that is, for those of you who know me, I am a big foodie. I love great food, and I think, someday I'm going to actually be able to cook well. But Bourdain and Andrew Zimmern are two of my so-called heroes if I had them. I'm thinking if I had that job, my goodness, I'd just be the happiest person. You travel the world, you taste all these foods, and you get to be a millionaire because of it. Certainly, that would make for a happy life. And y'all know he tragically took his own life. Someone who had it all. He really did. How come his money didn't solve his problems? How come his fame didn't solve his problems? I mean, the world tells us, doesn't it? Don't you believe? Right around the corner, if a few more of my circumstances work out, that's when I'm going to have happiness and joy. And how many of these testimonies do we need from people who have got everything and their lives are no better off than the rest of us? It is such a testimony to the truths of God. Jesus says over and over, your life is not made up of the abundance of your possessions, or your life is not made up of whether other people like you or not. You ought to be defined by something more than that. And that only comes from within. And when it's all said and done, you're going to know if you've arrived not by what's in the bank account or the degrees on the wall, but you're going to know you've arrived if you're able to sit around a table or sit around a television set or sit on the beach watching the glittery sparkles. Think of that. He's experienced the whole world. He said, my favorite thing is to watch the glittery sparkles. And he said, that's what thrills me. That's when I know I've arrived. Who created the family unit? God did. Y'all know that, right? You didn't decide this. I'm going to have a family, therefore I'm going to create a family unit. No. Who created marriage? God did. Who created the idea of children? God did. Who were the first children? Us. And who is the parent? God. Now, we're in this book, we're in chapter 2. If you haven't read it, you should. I mean, my goal with these sermons, all of them, is that you will learn valuable things and go back and apply them to your, in this case, how you deal with your parents, or how you deal with your spouse, or how you deal with your kids, or even your friends. I mean, these principles, Covey's been around somewhat for a long time. He's successful because these principles work. That's just the truth of it. However, these principles have been around a lot longer than Stephen Covey. And so one of the reasons I'm preaching through this book is because the biblical principles behind Covey's works literally have been on paper from God to us for about 2,000 years. In some respects, before that. So let's start with that opening question, because it's just such a good one. Iggy Pop has experienced everything in life. He's getting towards the end of his life. The average age, male life expectancy today is 76. Women, you got 5 years on us, 81. Sometimes people ask me, well, what if the Lord returns? I'm like, don't worry about it. How old are you? Well, I'm 55. Okay, if you're a male, you got 21 years left, and then you're done. Jesus is going to meet you in 21 years on average. Have you ever thought about that? Like, well, who cares? Who cares? Well, because every day that passes, you're a little closer to that end. And I do funerals far more often than I like, but inevitably at the funerals, you can tell those who lived with the end in mind and those who didn't. Who do you want to end your life with? Strangers? It's a good question. Maybe I'll just let it sit for a second. Who do you want when you've got a month to live? Do you want to be developing a relationship with a new spouse? I got a month to live. Let's date. Let's get married and get to... Nobody wants that. How come? You got a year to live. You want to develop a relationship with a new spouse with 1 year left? No. How come? What about children? You want, at the end of your life, you got a year left. You want kids that you've walked through 50 years together and been there, never forsaken nor left one another for that whole time. Or you want a baby. You got 6 months left. Let's have a baby. How come? You know the answer. Hopefully, like any sermon, I'm telling you things you already know. Maybe you just didn't put it together this way. But the idea is we all, at least ideally, we all understand on a deeper level that the relationships that matter the most are the ones that are the longest. They're the ones that have stayed there and stuck there, never left, never forsaken, not just when life is good, but also when what? Life is bad. And it's sharing all of that together through the ups and the downs that over time makes that relationship incredibly valuable. Notice the tenure of it matters. Is that true? Is that fair? So how do you have longer tenured relationships with people? And most people in our world today, half of us at least where marriages are concerned, we don't. We just don't. We don't have long tenured relationships. Have y'all thought about that? How do we have long-term relationships with our children? Do we want that? And the answer is, of course we do. Well, how do we pull that off? And one of the points that Covey brings up that is just so good, again, in this book, one of the ways we pull off long-tenured relationships with spouse, with our parents, with our kids, we have to begin the relationship, I would say every day, with the end in mind. Begin your perspective on the relationship with the end in mind. We'll break that down for just a little bit here in our time remaining. In 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 9, and I've finally given up. I know some of you are actually looking at your Bibles on your cell phones instead of texting your friends. So if you want to use your phones to look it up, that's great. My point in all this is that you have a Bible somewhere that you actually open, whether it's on your phone or your email or whatever, but that we are opening this book and considering what God has to say to us through it. We are at 2 Peter chapter 1, and I'm going to read, I'll start in verse 5. The whole chapter is great. By his divine power, the Lord has given us everything we need for life and godliness through the knowledge of the one who called us by his own honor and glory. Now, that's a big statement. That's a whole other sermon Do we have everything we need to glorify God? And what is glorifying God? Bearing fruit, which is joy, peace, love. Good. Yeah. You don't need, and part of what we're going to talk about through circumstances is God's already given us what we need to have a good life, an abundant life. Through his honor and glory, he has given us his precious and wonderful promises that you may share the divine nature and escape from the world's immorality that sinful craving produces. That sinful cravings and immoralities, by the way, lead to ruining you. It's that old deal. We don't follow God's law because it's the rules. We follow God's law because we know people who break the rules go to jail. And so we try to learn what the rules are. Rules concerning what? Well, in this case, how to relate to each other. If you break it down, all the Old Testament, all the New Testament, all the laws God ever gave us, they all come down to this: how to love one another better, and how to love God, and how to love yourself in a healthy way. This is why in verse 5, you must take every effort to add moral excellence to your faith. To add to, right? To keep working on, to get stronger in. And to your moral excellence, knowledge. Without knowledge, you're never going to change a thing. Knowledge is how we begin to transform its perspective. From that, once you learn what to do, self-control. You have to do what you know. Otherwise, your knowledge is completely worthless. Endurance. So it's not enough just to have self-control once. Our problems are always habitual, right? So whatever issues that you have in your marriage or with your kids or parents today, guess what? You're always going to have them. The issue is, do you have the self-control to control them, and then have the endurance to keep having self-control and over and over again when you keep wanting to go back to old habitual sins. And to endurance, godliness. To godliness, affection. Notice, you can't really care for someone else without all the other stuff, without knowledge and self-control. And above all these things, he ends with love. If all these are yours and they're growing in you, they'll keep you from becoming inactive and unfruitful. That includes your family. Y'all have heard me say it a million times. I'll say it a million more. I kind of hit it hard last week. But if you want to be fruitful with your family, start by bearing God's fruit within yourself. You take two miserable people and you put them in a room, and guess what the room's going to be filled with? Misery. It doesn't matter how miserable the person across the seat from you is. If you bring misery to that as well, you'll never be happier than your weakest link. You just can't, which is why the first thing is work on yourself. You bring joy into the room. You bring joy to the relationship with your kids or your parents or your spouse. Start there, because you'll never be better off than you. Anyway, you do these things, you'll become fruitful in the knowledge of our Lord. And whoever lacks these things, here we go, is short-sighted and blind. That is such a big word. Many of you know the original New Testament, they spoke Greek and they wrote in Greek. So the original word there is M-Y-O-P-I-A. Myopia. That's where we get our English word myopic. What is myopia? All right, well, on a physical level, if you read my blog, I talked about how we figured out my son he was having some problems, and he's never had problems in school. And all of a sudden, we're having issues with school. We couldn't figure out why. And then one day, we're watching him, and he's blinking and blinking and blinking. And it just dawned on me, before I had the LASIK surgery, like before the very last one, I was about 2,800 vision. Yeah, that was when you had to wear the Coke bottle glasses. I had to wear a neck brace to hold my glasses up. You see old pictures of me. It's like, what's the neck brace for? It's like I couldn't keep my glasses up any other way. I very much still remember, and any of you who have had the surgery, you know what I'm talking about, how you wake up and you can't see the alarm clock. You're literally stumbling around the house, hoping not to trip on a dog toy or kids' shoes or something, because you can't see. I used to love to water ski, and, well, I guess it doesn't matter now. I'm 47. What are my parents going to do, right? So, but we love to spray piers, which you're not supposed to do that because you might hit them, right? Well, the problem is when you're good on a slalom, that's not the problem. But the problem, if you're good, you get real close and you spray everything on the pier, and you're really hoping people are on the pier because you spray them with water too. Because you love to see strangers who are drinking their beer or whatever, then you coat them with water, get water in their beer, and they're, cussing at you as go by, and you're like, eh. It really is kind of cool. Except when you're 2,800 vision. Because it's like you see the pier coming, it's like, I know it's there, and then all of a sudden, it's there. My brother actually hit a pier once, broke the ski in half. He regretted that, by the way. Anyway, think about it, myopia. It is the inability to see far away. If you ever have problems driving, some of you, it's like, I can't drive at night. How come? Because I can't see. What happens when you can't see far away and you're driving? It is a risk. And the worse your eyesight, the more risk it is, because if you can't see things in the distance and they're in your path, what happens when you come across those? You're going one way or the other, you're going to have serious issues. So that's the surface level, no interpretation to it. So let's take that and bring it down to a deeper level and understand Peter. Again, let's read again. Whoever lacks these things is short-sighted and blind. Point being, it is a bad thing for you human beings, God says, to be short-sighted and blind. Is he talking about vision? Is he talking about driving a car? No. So what's he talking about? Your perspective on all of life. He's saying it is a bad thing for you, human being, right, to live your life short-sighted and blind. What's the opposite of living your life short-sighted and blind? Being able to see into the distance. Being able to see clearly. Not just what's in front of you, but what is far, far ahead. Now, how does this relate to us? Stephen Covey has a couple great quotes. But last week, we kind of broke down a little what it means to be proactive. And I talked about it in terms of being a light into the world and how Jesus says, don't put a cover on your light. That you can't shine your light by never saying anything, never doing anything, by always acting like a doormat and hoping that it just gets better in the future. The way we shine our lights is to take the cover off and to look for strategic ways that we can be a positive, not only proactive, but if possible, interactive influence with our spouse or kids or parents or whoever, so that we can help raise the level of the whole family, the family culture, the relationship, whatever, so that when we are a light, when we walk into the room, our goal is to be a light to the world. And where does the world start? Jesus says in Acts, he says the world starts in Jerusalem. It starts in your home. He went so far as to say, if you go back and read it, you be a light into the world, and literally he says, to your house. That's Jesus' exact words. Go back last week if you missed it. Why? Because the most effective witness you will ever have is with your closest relationships. Period. And by the way, that's why so many of our relationships have problems, because the closest people to us also know how much of a mess we are. And that's why we get, especially with parents, we get accused of being hypocrites, because we're like, well, you need to do this. And our kids are like, well, you aren't doing it. Well, do as I say, not as I do. Well, that doesn't work, does it? But regardless, the truth of the matter is, your greatest witness is going to be to the people closest to you. And we're called to be a proactive, if not interactive, light to them. Now, today, the idea is to think through, what does it mean to be the opposite of proactive, and how do we get out of that? The opposite of being proactive is reactive. And I would suggest to you that whether you're in the corporate world or whether you're in the family unit or whether you're just dealing with people on the street, the hardest people in the world to deal with and work with are reactive people. Why is that? Well, what does it mean to be reactive? It means you're not thinking, you're not clear-headed, you don't see the things that really matter. All that you're doing is reacting to the closest stimulus to your face. You're not self-controlled, right? You're just, whatever happens, it's knee-jerk going against those things. Stephen Covey put it this way. Put this in your sermon notes. If you don't have note, these are either online, you have them here. I hope you'll take these home and study them per usual. I put too much information in here for you to learn in this time we have together. But my hope is that you'll go home and work on it. But he says this, reactive people are always overly affected by their environment, by the people around them and by the things around them. If the weather is good, they're going to feel good. If it isn't, it affects their attitude and performance, in the same way. Proactive people carry their own weather with them. I just really like that. How do you become more proactive? Well, the beginning place for that, which is why I think this is chapter 2 for Covey, you got to be able to see. You can't help but be reactive if the only thing you can see is right in front of your face. If you're driving down the road and you got 2800 vision, all you can do is react to the closest thing on the street. We all know you are a much better driver when you've got clear vision, you get your glasses right, and you can see a mile down the road. How come? Because you can plan and you can think. You can control what's going on there. 1 Peter 5:8, another verse, just real close to this one. I just thought that you'd want to see it, but it's the same idea. In 1 Peter 5, actually I'll start reading in verse 6. He says, humble yourselves under God's power so that he may raise you up on the last day. Throw all your anxiety onto God. All your anxieties, give them to the Lord. Why? Because he cares for you. He loves you. He wants to help you. But remember, you have to ask. You have to ask. God's ready and willing, but you gotta say, God, please get involved. We do have this thing called free will. And then he says, be clear-headed. Clear-headed. Y'all use your brains and think, what's the opposite of clear-headed? Confused, foggy, unsure. I like the word sound mind. Sound mind. It's like your mind is clear. You're thinking clearly. You're not reacting. Now, let's think about family dysfunction. When we are at our worst, with our kids or our spouses or our parents, it's all the same. It's when you can say, quote unquote, well, they got under my skin. And think how this works. They start saying the right thing because they know the buttons to push. You've been dealing with a long time and you've got this history of problems that are piled up on top of that one. They get under your skin and you start doing what? Reacting, which basically means not thinking, not having self-control. You're just responding with the knee-jerk reaction to whatever they've said. How many of you would say when you're in the midst of reacting to a family member who has really hit your button, that you are of sound mind in that moment? No one? We got a nice, we have lots of folks here today. Not one of us. And the scriptures say that's how we're supposed to always be, of sound mind. Thinking clearly, self-controlled, sober. You can go through. Well, I will suggest to you the only way we're ever going to pull that off, again, is to keep the end in view every day. One of the reasons you need a daily devotional, and I think typically before you start your day, is because it helps us do what? Get perspective on the things of the day. It helps us if you're not careful, you jump out of bed and you jump in your car, you jump in all this crazy stuff, and all of a sudden you're reacting to things. You're taking care of the urgent things over the important things. And you react all day long and you wind up, your knees are just jerking all over the place, and you come home your mind's muddy and cloudy, and then all of a sudden a spouse or a kid or something says something, and you react to that, and all of a sudden the whole day is just every day we need to take a deep breath and think about, okay, what are the important things today as opposed to the urgent things? What are the things that matter? And here's the big question. Where's this all going? Where's this all going? Where are you hoping that your relationship with your spouse today is going to go? And are you helping it get to that place? Where are you hoping your relationship with your kids is going to go? Or parents? And have you even thought about it? One of the points Covey brings up is that y'all need to think about it. You need to sit down with your spouse and use me as an excuse. This is a great thing about church. I hate to break it to you, but I'm not thinking about any of you individually when I prepare this message. Just sorry. But you all know I'm talking to you because most of us haven't done this. And people, if I ever get the chance, nobody really ever listens to me when I do premarital counseling. I figured that out. But if they ever did, one of the things that I would try to get into their heads is you need to talk about your vision for what this thing called marriage is supposed to be. What are you hoping for from this? C.S. Lewis, it's a long passage. It's just so good. If you have marriage issues or you just want a refresher course, in Mere Christianity, there are 3 pages that are really good. He's got a whole chapter on Christian marriage. I just wanted to read you some excerpts where he's talking about giving up the short-term reactionary view of relationships and get a bigger end-in-mind type perspective on what this is all about. And Iggy Pop, the reason I use that illustration is because he really talks about, in that video, what C.S. Lewis is saying. But let me just give you a few things. He says, being in love is a good thing. And he's talking about the high school-y love. Oh my goodness, you're so cute. You know, sweaty palms, getting nervous before you hold hands. He said, that's a good thing. But it is not the best thing. We idolize that as we get older, thinking, if I could go back to that, oh my goodness, that would be just wonderful. No, it wouldn't. It really wouldn't. Because it's not the best thing. There are many things below that, being in love, and there are also many things above it. He's like, you cannot make this feeling the basis of your whole life. It is noble, but it's just a feeling. No feeling can be relied on to last in its full intensity or even last at all. A lot of you talk to me about, I don't feel the same way when I was first saved. Well, of course you don't. You've grown up. Feelings don't last. If the old fairy tale ending, they lived happily ever after, is taken to mean they felt for the next 50 years exactly as they felt the day before they were married, then it says what probably never was or ever could be true. And it would be highly undesirable if it were. If y'all are thinking, a part of you saying, you're wrong, Thomas, C.S. Lewis, he got this wrong. It would be awesome if I had the same feelings today I had the day before I was married. C.S. Lewis is saying, no, it wouldn't. Because your feelings would be infantile. Your feelings would be amateurish, like a teenager. Grow up. That's not what we're looking for here. What are we looking for? That's a great question, Thomas. Read it to us. It is a deep unity maintained by your will, by your conscious will, and deliberately strengthened by your habits, reinforced in Christian marriages by the grace which both parents ask and receive from God. They can have this love for each other, even at those moments when they hate each other. As you love yourself, even when you do not like yourself. You can retain this love even when each person would easily, if they allowed themselves, be in love with someone else. The thrill, now remember Anthony Bourdain's words to Iggy Pop. What thrills you today? All right, the thrill. So C.S. Lewis is talking about the thrill, and I think it's the same exact thing. The thrill you feel on first seeing some delightful place dies away when you go and live there. Does this mean it would be better not to learn to fly and not to live in this beautiful place? By no means. In both cases, if you go through with it, here we go. The dying away of the first thrill will be compensated for by a quieter and more lasting kind of interest than you ever had before. Let the thrill go. Let the thrill die. Go on through that period of death into the quieter interest and true happiness that necessarily follows, and you will find you are living in a world of new thrills all the time. It is because so few people understand this that you're going to find many middle-aged men and women meandering about their lost youth at the very age when new horizons ought to be appearing and new doors opening all around them. It is so much better and more fun to learn to swim than to go on endlessly and hopelessly trying to get back to that feeling you had when you were first paddling as a boy. What's he saying? Well, a lot. But he's saying what Iggy Pop was telling Anthony Bourdain, in my opinion. What did Iggy Pop say? Who has had more thrills than most of us, most normal human beings could ever understand. I mean, he's lived that type of life that as a teenager, most people would be like, that's it. That's what I want to do. He lived all that, and he's on the other side saying, that did nothing for me. Well, what thrills you, Bourdain asks? Sitting on the beach, watching the sparkles on the water, and sharing life with someone I love. Why do you get married? Why do we have kids? Why do we have friends? Why do we have pets? I got a great, cute little poodle, but that poodle's a pain. I got to feed, oh, yes, he is. I got to feed him twice a day. I had to give him a bath last night. Sometimes he eats stuff he's not supposed to eat. Sometimes he pees on things that he's not supposed to pee on. That's fair. But sometimes, when everything's quiet and I'm laying down for a nap, he'll come up and he'll literally fall asleep on my chest. And it's just magic. It's just magic. I'll tell you, in a weird way, that I feel closer to God in those times than sometimes here in church. It's not. Why have kids? And parents are always going, I'm just not sure. But you know why? Because, and also why get married. I'll tell you, last night, me, Gladys, and Scott, just the three of us, we were home, and I cooked one of the things I really like, and it was a good effort on my part, and just the three of us, we turned on our Spotify peaceful piano and ate my little bite of steak, and there's Scott, and here's Gladys, and it was totally boring and totally awesome. What were we doing? It wasn't a thrill, but I remember I think I said to him, I was like, man, isn't this what life is about? There was no arguing. It was just, we were just enjoying sitting around the table, sharing life. And I think about, for me, I don't think I'm setting myself up to be awesome here. I got all kinds of issues, which my family can attest to. But I do know this is over time, studying all this stuff, I'm beginning to figure out that that's what matters. That's it. I mean, I want to get the degrees on the wall. I want to make the straight A's. I want the church to have 5 bazillion people just because I want to reach more people for Christ. But when it's all said and done, I want that to go on and on and on so that when I die, at least 2 people are going to be by my bedside, if they're still here. My son and my wife. When I get sick, I guarantee you, and I'm probably going to get sick, and one of you is going to give me the flu. Thank you very much. But anyway, when I'm throwing up like all y'all are going to be, and I'm feeling horrible, my absolute, unquestioning prophecy is my wife and my son will be there. And if they get sick, you know what? Lord willing, I'll be there for them. I'm 47. That means I've got 29 years left till I kick the bucket. If I want my life to be filled between now and 76 with days like yesterday, what Covey and Peter and Jesus and all these other people are saying is, Thomas, you're going to have to keep the end in view. You're going to have to remember how you're hoping this is all going to turn out. We have to do the dishes. We have to vacuum the floor. We have to do the laundry. You have to clean up after the dog. All the things of life that are urgent, yes, you have to take care of those, but never at the expense of what matters. Why? Because if you lose what matters, none of it matters. Yes? Covey talks about, and businesses do this. In leadership courses, they'll be, okay, you got to define the mission statement of your business, the purpose statement. They want you to define values and vision and mission, all kinds of stuff. So he talks about that in terms of you need to define your own purpose statement. Sit down with your spouse and say, what is the purpose of our marriage? Sit down with your children and let them get engaged and say, what do you think the purpose of me as your father is? What is the purpose of us as parents? To be your best friends? The answer is no, by the way. It's to be your father and to do everything in my power to teach you about all that horrible stuff in the world so you don't have to go through it, so you can avoid all the problems that I've been through myself. They never believe us. But that's there's more to it than that. I'm overgeneralizing, I get that. But he does recommend sit down and define these things. Spend some time saying, what is the point of this? Businesses do it. He's saying households should do it. But I would suggest one other twist to that, which is a good thing. But notice it's very subjective. Where I want to pull all this together is, if you want to know what the end goal is, and here's the good piece on it, we've already been given the answer. You are to imitate Christ and glorify God in your family. Imitate Christ and glorify God in your marriage. Imitate Christ and glorify God as a parent. Imitate Christ, glorify God when you're dealing with your aging parents. Or if you're younger, you're dealing with your crazy parents. What does that mean? Well, let's talk about the imitate God. If you want to know what God looks like, where do you look? The word is always Jesus. Okay, if you need to imitate God, where do you look? Jesus, yeah. If you never know the answer, just say Jesus and you're close. Think about this. If your spouse always acted like Jesus to you, would your marriage be better? Yeah. If they're always forgiving, if they're always gracious, if they're always willing to pick up a cross and carry it for you, if they're always willing to think the best of you, if they're willing to love you no matter what, if you as a parent, or if your parents to you, always act like Jesus, what do you think? Going to be better? Yeah. You bet. If my parents were always forgiving, always loving, never saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, never making any mistakes, if they're, wow. And if I was that type of parent, if I could literally parent like Jesus, my goodness. Oh, wait a minute. That's what a disciple is. In Ephesians, which we're going to talk about in about 4 weeks, an oft-ignored scripture which just blows my mind. Ephesians 5:21 says, submit to one another. And then he goes on to define what that submission looks like through the lens of the world 2,000 years ago. And he talks about the body of Christ and how you have the bride of Christ, and it's almost like Christians and Jesus are married. What does that look like when you're married to Jesus? What does it look like when Jesus says that's how your marriage to one another ought to be? Anyway, we're not going into that too much today. The other half I want to give you is glorifying God. So you imitate Christ for the point of glorifying God. What does it mean to glorify God? Again, the point of this church is to lead all of us to the abundant life of Christ. And we know, well, what does that look like? Well, it's defined by bearing fruit. You are a happier person. If you don't like the word happy, fine. You are a more joy-filled person. You have more love and patience. And you're not irritable. And you're kind. You don't keep a record of wrongs. See, that's 1 Corinthians 13. You're good. You're faithful. You have self-control. And all that stuff comes out as you become more and more good, more and more like Christ. God is glorified. What does it mean when God is glorified? It means all the goodness within you, within your marriage, within your family, all that goodness we lift up to God, and God is on the receiving end of that saying, that's awesome. Just like when your children experience goodness, it makes you happy. Doesn't it? And then we realize, what's the point of this? God created us to be His children, and God gave us families. Not we came up with it. God gave us the idea of families because that's who God is, always, always in relationship. Which brings us back to Iggy Pop and to my concluding remarks. Think about it, folks. You can go through the whole world, and you can accomplish great things. You can be successful at work. You can be a world-renowned rock star. You can have bazillions of dollars in the bank and lines of other human beings wanting to shake your hand. But without love, it means nothing. Iggy Pop, by the way, didn't come up with that idea. It's been around a long time. Jesus defines the standards. Jesus gives us the mission. Jesus gives us the vision. He says, if you forget it all, remember this: love God and love other people and love yourself. That vision needs to be discussed with your spouse, with your kids, and every single day, in my opinion, if you want to stay on track, you got to wake up and think about, what's the point? Where am I going? What am I hoping for? And as you think about that vision, you also notice what happens when you get off track. Because the discipleship piece also course corrects along the way if you're a little bit humble and a little bit self-aware. This is supposed to be love. We're supposed to be together till death do we part, in sickness and in health, for better and for worse. Oh yeah, we're not doing that. And the Lord will be like, come on, let me help you with that. Because I want you to be for one another what I am for you. And what is Jesus for us? God says, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. End of story. Now you go, right, and be that to one another. And we'll continue next week. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for yet again reminding us through your word that we got work to do, and that your vision, your standard for our lives is higher than we would set for ourselves, and where we need to course correct. I just pray even now, me too, all of us would have the humility, the willingness to confess and to repent, and to just, with your help, Lord, to do better moving forward with our parents, where we have them with our spouses, with our kids, with all the meaningful relationships we have in life. I pray for everyone here, those online as well, everyone who's joining us, Lord, that we very much would know your wisdom, your peace, which surpasses all comprehension. I pray that you would fill us, our hearts and our homes, with your Holy Spirit, that we might be a little bit more healed, that through it all, for one another and to us, we might understand the height and the depth and the width and the breadth of your love for us. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you all for coming. Hope to see you next week. Cameron's got a few words, and then we'll hit the road.
I'm going to be hanging out up here for a couple minutes. Again, if you're new, I'd love to shake your hand and just say welcome if you have questions about the church or small groups or anything. And just a reminder about women's ministry out here, missions meeting out there. And then if you're interested in small group stuff, we'll be in the youth building after this. But guys, have a wonderful Sunday. See you.